What follows is the story of how Hemingway became Hemingway in the first place, and the book that set it all in motion. The backstory of The Sun Also Rises and that of its author's rise are one and the same. Critics have long cited Hemingway's second novel, A Farewell to Arms, as the one that established him as a giant in the literary pantheon. But in many ways, the significance of The Sun Also Rises is much greater. As far as literature was concerned, it essentially introduced its mainstream readers to the 20th century. The Sun Also Rises did more than break the ice, says Lauren Stein, editor of the Paris Review. It was modern literature fully arrived for a grand public. I'm not sure that there was ever another moment when one novelist was so obviously the leader of a whole generation. You read one sentence, and it doesn't sound like anything that came before. Not that there weren't other tremors before this earthquake. A small movement of writers had been trying to shove literature out of musty Edwardian corridors and into the fresh air of the modern world. It was a question of who would break through first, and who could make new ways of writing appealing to the mainstream reader, who, for the most part, still seemed to be perfectly satisfied with the more florid, verbose approaches of Henry James and Edith Wharton. James Joyce's radical novel Ulysses, for example, had blown the minds of many post-war writers. But at first the work was hardly a mainstream sensation. It wasn't even released in book form in the United States until the 1930s. Paris-based experimentalist Gertrude Stein had resorted to self-publishing her works, which were often deemed incomprehensible by those who actually did read them. One of her books reportedly sold a mere 73 copies in its first 18 months of existence. F. Scott Fitzgerald had also been striving to reinvent the American novel and felt that he'd succeeded with the publication of The Great Gatsby in 1925. Yet while the content of his novels was thoroughly modern, flappers, bootleggers, and other exotic urban creatures, his style remained decidedly old school. Fitzgerald was a 19th century soul, says Charles Scribner III, a former director of Charles Scribner's Sons, which published both Fitzgerald and Hemingway for the majority of their careers. He was wrapping up a grand tradition. He was the last of the Romantics. He was Strauss. Hemingway, by contrast, was Stravinsky. He was inventing a whole new idiom and tonality, explained Scribner, and he was completely 20th century. As one prominent critic noted around that time, Hemingway succeeded in doing for writing what Picasso and the Cubists had been doing for painting. After the debut of the primitive modern idiom of Cubism, and Hemingway's stark, staccato prose, nothing would ever be the same again. Modernity had found its popular creative leaders. The Sun Also Rises immediately established Hemingway not only as the voice of his generation, but as a lifestyle icon as well. Before the novel's debut, Fitzgerald had been doing most of the talking. In those days, novelists had quite a national platform. Movies were still a relatively new medium. TV was decades away. Novels and stories were a major form of popular entertainment. Fitzgerald had become a national celebrity. His new works were devoured and discussed as the finale of a beloved television show, such as The Sopranos or Mad Men, might be rhapsodized about today. Yale students flocked to the New Haven Railroad Station when trains bearing magazines with his latest stories were due to arrive. From Fitzgerald's point of view, however, that generation was a decadent, champagne-soaked constituency. The Great Gatsby became the Bible of the Jazz Age, which Fitzgerald himself had done much to invent. If he was seen as an apt chronicler of his times, he also prompted life to imitate art. Many fashioned themselves after Fitzgerald's racy characters, and after Fitzgerald and his flapper wife Zelda themselves. Scott gave the era a tempo, Zelda wrote years later, and a plot from which it might dramatize itself. Hemingway's debut novel changed that tempo considerably. With the publication of The Sun Also Rises, His generation was informed that
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description. It will take you to a free Audible trial where you can listen to this and many other books for free for 30 days.